The smell of burnt coffee and stale cigarettes filled the cramped apartment in downtown Detroit. Rain pelted against the cracked window of the kitchen, where 22-year-old Marcus Thompson sat hunched over his laptop, the blue glow of the screen illuminating the dark circles under his eyes. It was 2:47 a.m., and he was editing another video for his YouTube channel, a channel that barely scraped together 50 subscribers after 8 months of relentless effort. "Marcus, turn that damn thing off and get some sleep." His mother Sandra's voice cut through the thin walls like a blade. Her tone carried the familiar mix of exhaustion and irritation that had become the soundtrack of their shared living space. "Just 5 more minutes, Mom," Marcus called back, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he fine-tuned the audio levels of his latest creation, a documentary-style piece about local small businesses struggling to survive in post-pandemic America. The apartment door slammed and Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway, her nurse scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift at Detroit General Hospital. At 45, she looked older, worn down by years of single motherhood and financial struggle. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes held that particular exhaustion that comes from carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. "Marcus, I'm serious. This YouTube nonsense has got to stop." She pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, the metal legs scraping against the linoleum floor. "You're 22 years old, living in my apartment, with no real job, no prospects, and you're wasting your life making videos that nobody watches." Marcus felt his chest tighten. These conversations had become more frequent over the past few months, each one chipping away at the fragile confidence he'd been trying to build. "Mom, you don't understand. This isn't just a hobby. I'm building something here. My latest video about Rodriguez's bakery got 300 views. That's progress." Sandra let out a bitter laugh that echoed off the bare walls. 300 views? "Marcus, I make more money in 1 hour than you've made in 8 months of this fantasy." She rubbed her temples, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were filled with a mixture of frustration and something that looked dangerously close to pity. "Honey, I love you, but you need to face reality. You'll never be anyone with this video stuff. It's time to grow up, get a real job, and stop chasing these impossible dreams." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard criticism before, from teachers, from friends, from the endless stream of online commenters who seemed to take pleasure in tearing others down. But hearing it from his mother, the woman who had raised him alone after his father walked out when he was 7, felt different. It felt final. "I work at the warehouse 4 days a week," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "That pays for my part of the rent and groceries. This isn't just some pipe dream, Mom. I'm documenting real stories, real people." Mrs. Rodriguez cried when she saw the video I made about her family's bakery. She said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for them. Sandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Crying doesn't pay the bills, Marcus. Pretty videos don't put food on the table or keep the lights on." She moved to the window, staring out at the empty street below, where a single streetlight flickered intermittently. "I've been working since I was 16. I put myself through nursing school while raising you. I never had the luxury of chasing dreams." The kitchen fell silent except for the steady drumming of rain against the window. Marcus saved his work and closed the laptop, the sudden darkness making the room feel even smaller. Outside, Detroit slept fitfully, a city of dreams deferred and hopes scaled back to fit the harsh realities of economic uncertainty. "I'm not asking you to support me forever," Marcus said finally. "I just need you to believe in me for a little while longer. I can feel something building. The local business series is getting attention. People are sharing the videos, talking about them." Sandra turned back to face him, and in the dim light filtering in from the hallway, Marcus could see the deep lines etched around her eyes, lines that told the story of every sacrifice she'd made, every dream she'd given up to keep them afloat. "Marcus, I've heard this before. Last year it was the music videos. Before that, it was the comedy sketches. You jump from one thing to another, always convinced that this time will be different." She moved closer to the table, her voice softer now but somehow more cutting. "I'm not trying to be cruel, baby. I'm trying to save you from a lifetime of disappointment. Some people are meant to be content creators, influencers, whatever you call it. But you She paused, choosing her words carefully. You don't have what it takes. You're not charismatic enough, not polished enough. You'll never be anyone in that world. Marcus felt something break inside him, a small but vital piece of hope that had been sustaining him through the long nights and longer days of building something from nothing. He looked at his mother, this woman who had sacrificed everything for him, and realized that her love, while genuine, came wrapped in limitations. Her protection felt like imprisonment. Maybe you're right, he said, though every fiber of his being rebelled against the words. Maybe I should just focus on the warehouse job, save up, get my own place. Sandra's expression softened slightly, relief replacing some of the tension in her features. That's all I want, honey. A stable life for you. Security. I don't want you to struggle like I have. As she headed toward her bedroom, pausing in the doorway, Marcus stared at his closed laptop. Tomorrow was Sunday, his one full day off from the warehouse. He had planned to film interviews with 3 more local business owners, continuing the series that had been slowly gaining traction in the Detroit community. But his mother's words echoed in the silence. You'll never be anyone. The rain continued to fall, and Marcus sat alone in the dark kitchen, wrestling with the weight of expectations and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, his mother was wrong. 3 weeks had passed since that crushing conversation with his mother, and Marcus had thrown himself into his warehouse job with renewed determination. The loading dock at Morrison Distribution Center had become his refuge from the suffocating weight of abandoned dreams. Here, among the towers of cardboard boxes and the constant hum of forklifts, he could lose himself in the simple, predictable rhythm of manual labor. "Thompson, lunch break!" shouted Jerry Martinez, the floor supervisor, his voice echoing across the cavernous warehouse space. The October afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows between the storage racks that stretched toward the ceiling like mechanical forests. Marcus set down the scanner and wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove. His YouTube equipment sat gathering dust in his bedroom closet, and he hadn't uploaded a video in 18 days. The local business documentary series had been left unfinished, despite receiving encouraging comments from viewers who were genuinely invested in these community stories. As he walked toward the break room, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a New York area code. Marcus almost declined the call. Telemarketers had been relentless lately, but something made him swipe to answer. "Hello, is this Marcus Thompson?" The voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of confidence that spoke of expensive suits and corner offices. "Yeah, this is Marcus. Who's calling?" "My name is Rebecca Chen, and I'm a producer with CNN's American Stories segment. I've been following your YouTube channel, particularly your series on local Detroit businesses." Marcus stopped walking so abruptly that another warehouse worker bumped into him from behind. His heart began racing as he tried to process what he was hearing. CNN, the major news network that his mother watched religiously every morning with her coffee. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Marcus asked, stepping into an empty conference room off the main warehouse floor. Through the glass windows, he could see his co-workers continuing their routines, completely unaware that his world was shifting beneath his feet. "We've been researching stories about young Americans who are documenting the economic recovery in their communities," Rebecca continued. "Your video about Rodriguez's bakery was shared by the Detroit Chamber of Commerce, and it caught our attention. The way you captured Mrs. Rodriguez talking about keeping her family legacy alive during the pandemic was genuinely moving." Marcus leaned against the conference table, his legs suddenly feeling unsteady. That video, the one his mother had dismissed as worthless, had somehow made its way to national television producers. I'm not sure what to say. Are you serious right now?" Rebecca's laugh was warm and genuine. "I understand this is unexpected. We'd like to feature you and your work in an upcoming segment about grassroots storytelling and community journalism. It would involve flying you to our Atlanta studio for a live interview with Anderson Cooper." The words hit Marcus like a physical force. Anderson Cooper, live television, national audience. Everything his mother had said was impossible suddenly seemed not just possible, but actually happening. "The segment would air next Thursday evening," Rebecca continued. We'd cover all travel expenses, put you up in a hotel, and we'd also like to send a crew to Detroit to film some of your upcoming interviews with local business owners. We want to show how young people like you are becoming the voice of their communities." Marcus's hand was shaking as he held the phone. Through the conference room window, he could see Jerry Martinez looking around, probably wondering where he'd disappeared to during lunch break. The normalcy of the warehouse suddenly felt surreal, like he was watching it through glass from another world. "Mr. Thompson, are you still there?" "Yes, sorry. This is just a lot to process. Can I ask how you found my channel? I mean, I only have about 200 subscribers. Sometimes the most authentic voices aren't the loudest ones," Rebecca replied. "Your subscriber count doesn't reflect the quality of your storytelling. The Detroit Chamber of Commerce shared your Rodriguez's bakery video on their LinkedIn, calling it the kind of authentic community journalism that captures the real spirit of Detroit's recovery. From there, it reached our social media team." Marcus thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, the 70-year-old woman who had been running her family bakery for 35 years. When he'd interviewed her, she'd shown him photographs of her late husband, talked about the recipes passed down through 3 generations, and cried when describing how the community had rallied around the bakery during the darkest months of the pandemic. He'd spent 6 hours filming and another 12 editing, crafting a 15-minute piece that felt like a love letter to resilience. "What would the interview focus on?" Marcus asked, his voice steadier now. "We want to talk about your approach to community storytelling, the impact these local businesses have had on you personally, and what you've learned about American resilience at the grassroots level. Anderson is particularly interested in hearing about what motivates young people to document these stories when traditional media often overlooks them." Marcus closed his eyes and saw his mother's face from that night 3 weeks ago, heard her words echoing, "You'll never be anyone with this video stuff." The irony was almost overwhelming. The very thing she'd dismissed as worthless fantasy had somehow caught the attention of one of the most respected news organizations in the world. "I need to think about this," Marcus said finally. "Can I call you back tomorrow?" "Of course." "But Marcus," Rebecca's voice carried a note of urgency, "don't overthink this. What you're doing matters. These stories you're telling, they're exactly what America needs to hear right now. Regular people doing extraordinary things to keep their communities alive." After hanging up, Marcus sat in the empty conference room for several minutes, watching his co-workers through the glass. The warehouse continued its steady rhythm, but everything felt different now. The future, which had seemed so narrow and predetermined just an hour ago, suddenly stretched wide with possibility. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Working late tonight, leftovers in the fridge." Marcus stared at the message, wondering how he was going to tell her about the call that had just changed everything. Marcus spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, Rebecca Chen's words playing on repeat in his mind. By 6 a.m., when his mother's alarm went off in the next room, he had made his decision. He was going to accept CNN's offer. But first, he needed to tell Sandra, and he knew it wasn't going to be easy. The smell of brewing coffee drifted through the apartment as Sandra prepared for another shift at the hospital. Marcus found her in the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, scrolling through news headlines on her phone while her coffee cooled on the counter. "Mom, we need to talk," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through his body. Sandra looked up, immediately sensing the seriousness in his tone. "If this is about that video stuff again, Marcus, I thought we settled this. You promised you'd focus on real work. CNN called me yesterday." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sandra's phone slipped slightly in her hand, and she set it down on the counter with deliberate care. Her dark eyes searched Marcus's face, looking for signs that this was some kind of elaborate joke. "What did you just say?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her Rebecca Chen's contact information, the call log showing the 47-minute conversation from the previous afternoon. "A producer from CNN's American Stories segment. They want to interview me on Anderson Cooper's show about my documentary series on local Detroit businesses." Sandra stood up slowly, her bathrobe falling open slightly as she moved closer to examine the phone. Marcus watched as disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been fear flickered across her features. "This is some kind of scam," she said finally. People pretend to be from TV networks all the time to steal your information or get money from you. Mom, I researched the number. It's legitimate. Rebecca Chen is listed on CNN's website as a senior producer. She knew specific details about my videos, mentioned Mrs. Rodriguez by name, talked about how the Detroit Chamber of Commerce shared my content. Sandra sank back into her chair, her coffee forgotten and growing cold. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were closing in around them. Outside, Detroit was waking up, the distant sound of traffic beginning to build, neighbors starting their cars, the familiar urban symphony that had been the soundtrack to their lives. Even if it's real, Sandra said quietly, this doesn't change anything. One interview doesn't make a career. They'll use you for their story and then forget you exist. Marcus felt a familiar frustration building in his chest, but this time it was tempered by something new, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. They want to send a film crew to Detroit to document me interviewing more local business owners. This isn't just a one-time thing, Mom. They're interested in the work I'm doing here, in the community. The community? Sandra's voice rose slightly. Marcus, half these businesses you're filming are barely hanging on. You're documenting failure, not success. I'm documenting resilience, Marcus countered. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't just survive the pandemic. She found ways to adapt, to keep employing her neighbors, to maintain something that's been part of this neighborhood for 35 years. That's not failure, that's strength. Sandra stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the morning light. You don't understand what it's like to watch your child chase something that will break their heart. I've seen too many people in this city believe they were going to make it big, only to end up broken and bitter. Like Dad? The words slipped out before Marcus could stop them. Sandra's body went rigid. Marcus's father, David, had been a musician who'd spent Marcus's early childhood chasing record deals and gigs that never materialized. He'd left when the reality of supporting a family became too heavy to bear alongside his fading dreams. Don't, Sandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't you dare compare yourself to him. I'm not running away, Mom. I'm running towards something. And for the first time, someone outside of this apartment believes in what I'm doing. Sandra turned around, and Marcus was shocked to see tears in her eyes. Do you know what it was like? Raising you alone while he was out there following his passion? Do you know how many nights I worked double shifts so you could have school supplies and decent clothes while he spent grocery money on recording studio time? The pain in her voice was raw, unfiltered, and Marcus suddenly understood that her criticism hadn't just been about his potential for failure. It had been about her terror of watching history repeat itself. I'm not him, Marcus said gently. I work at the warehouse. I pay my share of the rent. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything for my dreams, but you're asking me to watch you risk everything for something that might not exist. Marcus moved closer to her, noticing for the first time how much smaller she seemed than she had when he was a child. What if it does exist, though? What if the thing you're afraid of is the very thing that could change our lives? Sandra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar that it transported Marcus back to his childhood, to all the times she'd comforted him after nightmares or scraped knees. They really want to interview you on national television? She asked, her voice small. Thursday night, live on CNN. They're flying me to Atlanta. Sandra was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the street where she'd raised her son, where she'd built a life from the wreckage of broken promises and abandoned dreams. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of every sacrifice she'd ever made. I'm scared, Marcus. I'm scared of hoping again. Marcus reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses from years of nursing work, the strength that had held their small family together through every storm. I'm scared too, Mom, but maybe it's time to be scared together instead of apart. The CNN studio in Atlanta was nothing like Marcus had imagined. The famous newsroom he'd seen on television countless times felt smaller in person, but somehow more electric. Banks of monitors displayed feeds from around the world, and the constant hum of activity created an atmosphere of controlled urgency that made his pulse quicken. 5 minutes until we're live, called out a production assistant, her headset crackling with communications from the control room. Marcus sat in the makeup chair, watching in the mirror as the artist applied a final touch of powder to reduce the shine under the studio lights. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Watching at Rodriguez's bakery with Mrs. Rodriguez and 20 other neighbors. Don't forget to breathe. 3 days earlier, after their emotional conversation in the kitchen, Sandra had surprised him by not just supporting his decision to accept the CNN interview, but by organizing a viewing party at the very bakery that had started this journey. She'd called Mrs. Rodriguez, who had immediately offered to close early and set up chairs in front of her small television for anyone who wanted to watch our Marcus on national TV. Marcus, Rebecca Chen appeared beside his chair, looking exactly as he'd imagined. Sharp, professional, but with kind eyes that had probably put countless nervous interviewees at ease. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure," Marcus admitted, adjusting his tie, the same one he'd worn to his high school graduation, now pressed and ready for its television debut. "Perfect. That's exactly how you should feel. Anderson is really looking forward to this conversation. He's been following your work since we first reached out to you, and he's genuinely impressed by your approach to community storytelling." Through the studio monitor, Marcus could see Anderson Cooper reviewing his notes at the anchor desk. The silver-haired journalist who had reported from war zones and natural disasters around the world was preparing to talk to a 22-year-old warehouse worker from Detroit about making YouTube videos. The surreal nature of the moment wasn't lost on him. 30 seconds, the production assistant called out. Marcus was escorted to a chair across from Anderson Cooper, who looked up with that familiar, reassuring smile that had become a fixture in American living rooms. "Relax," Cooper said quietly. "We're just having a conversation. Tell the story the way you'd tell it to a friend." The studio lights blazed to life, and suddenly they were live, broadcasting to millions of households across the country, including a cramped apartment in Detroit, where his mother was probably gripping her coffee cup with white knuckles. "Good evening, I'm Anderson Cooper. Tonight on American Stories, we're talking about the power of local journalism and how young Americans are finding new ways to tell the stories of their communities. Our guest is Marcus Thompson, a 22-year-old from Detroit whose YouTube documentaries about local businesses have caught national attention." Cooper turned to Marcus with genuine warmth. "Marcus, tell us how this all started. What made you pick up a camera and start documenting the businesses in your neighborhood?" Marcus felt his nervousness evaporate as he began to speak. "It started with Mrs. Rodriguez's bakery, actually. I'd been going there since I was a kid, buying cookies with whatever change I could find. During the pandemic, I noticed she was struggling to keep the doors open, but she never complained. She just kept baking, kept serving the neighborhood. I realized her story, their story, wasn't being told anywhere. And what did you discover when you started telling these stories?" "I discovered that resilience looks different than what we see in movies or read about in books. It's not dramatic or flashy. It's Mrs. Rodriguez getting up at 4 a.m. every day to bake bread for a neighborhood that sometimes can't afford to buy it. It's Jerome at the corner market extending credit to families between paychecks. It's ordinary people doing extraordinary things just by refusing to give up." Cooper leaned forward slightly. "Your mother wasn't initially supportive of this work. Can you tell us about that?" Marcus paused, thinking about Sandra watching from Rodriguez's bakery, surrounded by the very people whose stories had brought him to this moment. "My mom is a nurse. She's worked double shifts to keep us afloat my entire life. When she saw me spending time on videos instead of focusing on traditional work, she was scared. She'd seen dreams destroy people before. But what she didn't understand, what I'm not sure I understood at first, is that this work isn't separate from the community we live in. It's part of it." "How so?" "When I interviewed Mrs. Rodriguez, she cried. Not because she was sad, but because someone finally saw her, really saw her. The video I made helped bring customers back to her bakery. People who'd never noticed it before started stopping by. The local Chamber of Commerce shared it. Her granddaughter in California saw it and called her for the first time in months." Cooper smiled. "So these aren't just documentaries, they're having real impact." "They're love letters," Marcus said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than his conscious mind. "To a city that people write off, to neighbors who keep going when it would be easier to quit, to my mom, who taught me that taking care of your community isn't a job, It's who you are. As the interview continued, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The warehouse worker who'd been told he'd never be anyone was gone, replaced by someone who understood that being someone wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about seeing the people around you clearly and helping them see themselves the same way. Marcus Thompson, thank you for reminding us that the most important stories are often happening right in our own neighborhoods, Cooper concluded as the segment ended. Later, as Marcus sat in his Atlanta hotel room, his phone exploded with messages, texts from neighbors he barely knew, emails from other young filmmakers, and a voicemail from his mother that simply said, "I'm proud of you, baby. Come home and tell us more stories." The next morning, his YouTube channel had gained 15,000 new subscribers overnight. But more importantly, he had 3 new interview requests from Detroit business owners who had watched the CNN segment and wanted to share their own stories of resilience. Marcus smiled as he packed his bag for the flight home, thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's bakery, where his mother was probably already planning the next community gathering. Some stories, he realized, were just beginning.